Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Enneagram compatibility, and specifically the matchup between type 2s and type 4s.
Okay.
So type 2s, those are the helpers, and type 4s are the individualists.
Yes.
And this one's kind of interesting because when you first look at it,
Yeah.
personality NFT gives this pairing an 8% initial compatibility score, which seems really low.
Yeah, it's low, but I think it's a really interesting pairing because it's one of those ones that really has the potential to be super warm and affectionate if it can open up to each other and really share their emotions.
Okay, so we're going to dive deep and see why that score is so low and what it takes to make this relationship work.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's start with a quick overview of each type.
Okay.
So type 2s, the helpers, they're all about supporting other people and nurturing other people.
Right. They're very people-oriented.
Yes, very, very.
Empathetic.
Yeah, big on empathy.
Big on making sure everyone feels loved. Focused on what is the right thing to do for the people that they care about.
Now, type 4s, these are the individualists.
Yeah.
And they bring like a depth and often have a very unique sense of humor. And they like to dive deep into their emotions, very introspective.
Yeah. They love exploring the philosophical concepts of life.
So on the surface, these two seem very different.
Yeah.
So how is it that they could ever work?
Well, the thing that they have in common is that emotional depth. Both of these types are very emotionally aware, and that can actually lead to really rich and really meaningful interactions.
Okay, but where are they going to clash then if they're both so good with their emotions?
Well, you can imagine the type 2 might be giving too much without getting enough affection in return.
Oh, so the 2s are going to feel drained?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
And then on the other side, the type 4 might feel misunderstood if their partner's not really grasping their complexity, or if they sense any emotional disingenuity.
Yeah, so both sides kind of have to be on the same page and being open and honest with each other about how they're feeling.
Totally.
Now, what about their daily life? What's that going to look like for a 2 and a 4?
Day to day, it can be really warm, lots of open affection.
That's nice.
The type 2 is going to be, empathetically working hard to meet their partner's needs. And the 4 is going to be bringing that artistic expression and that emotional depth to the relationship. They love to share aesthetic experiences with each other.
I like that.
But I think a potential challenge is that both of these types are very fluent in emotions. So there might be some mood swings that they have to navigate together.
Right.
But the flip side is that they can be very supportive of each other.
Yeah.
Because they both understand what it's like to feel things very deeply.
Right, and they get it.
Exactly.
Now, how about if a 2 and a 4 are just friends?
I think that they can be really good friends.
Okay.
It's a very connected and supportive bond.
Okay.
The 2 is always there to care for them and support them.
Right.
And the 4 contributes those really interesting, unique perspectives. It leads to some really rich conversations about their feelings and their personal growth and development.
So they're each getting what they need in that friendship.
Absolutely. They both feel very understood in that relationship, and they're getting that support for their very emotional worlds.
Okay, but, all relationships have some potential conflict areas. So what are we looking at for a 2 and a 4?
Well, yeah, I think one of the big things is going back to that 2 overgiving,
Right.
They might feel taken advantage of if the 4 isn't reciprocating.
Okay.
I think also the 4's introspective nature might sometimes clash with the 2's desire to keep things harmonious.
Because they're looking inward and the 2's trying to create that external harmony.
I think they also might run into some issues just because their communication styles are so different.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, the 2's very focused on keeping the peace, and so they might not always be super direct with what they need.
Okay.
And then the 4, they might have trouble articulating their complex feelings.
So then the 2's left wondering, like, what's going on?
Exactly.
And the 4 feels like they're not being heard.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So it can be a little bit tricky.
And then on top of all that, we're dealing with 2 very sensitive types.
Right.
So, like, how do they handle negative emotions?
That can be a tough one for sure.
Yeah.
Both types are very easily hurt. And so if either one of them feels unappreciated, that can really lead to tension.
That makes sense.
And then, we think about their love languages.
Yeah.
The D2 is all about those acts of service.
Right. Very overt.
Exactly. Very overt. Whereas the 4 is a little bit more subtle. So they might show their love in different ways. And that can lead to miscommunications as well.
Okay. So communication is key.
Yeah.
But how does that actually look in practice? Like, how do they make sure that they're communicating effectively?
Well, I think it starts with being really honest with themselves about what they need.
Okay.
And then expressing those needs to their partner in a clear and compassionate way.
So for the T2, that might mean saying, hey, I really appreciate everything you do, but I would also love it if you could.
Exactly.
And then fill in the blank with whatever that need is.
Yep.
And then for the 4, it's about maybe being a little more direct with their feelings.
Yeah, instead of, hoping that their partner will just kind of sense what's going on.
Right.
They need to actually put it into words.
Yeah.
So that the two can understand.
Okay, so communication, honesty, all very important.
Mm-hmm.
But how about in like a work environment? How do these two work together?
Oh, I think they can be a really fantastic team.
Okay.
The Rhine 2 is so supportive, and they really want everyone to succeed.
Yeah.
And then you've got the 4 who's bringing all that creativity and those innovative ideas.
So it's kind of that classic balance of the heart and the mind.
Yeah, totally.
Oh.
The Rhine 2's got that heart-centered approach.
Yeah.
And the 4 is really thinking outside the box.
And they can really make some magic happen.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, how about when it comes to personal growth? How do they help each other evolve and become the best versions of themselves?
Well, the Rhine 2 is really good at creating that safe space for the 4 to explore their emotions. They're very patient and they're really good listeners.
And the 4? How do they help the 2?
I think the 4 can help the 2 to connect with their own authenticity. The 2 can sometimes be so focused on pleasing others that they lose sight of their own needs and their own desires.
Right.
And the 4 can really help them to tap into that.
Okay, so it's a very supportive dynamic in terms of personal growth.
Yeah, definitely.
But, life isn't always sunshine and roses.
Sadly not.
So how do these 2 handle those big life transitions, those times when things get tough?
That can be a bit of a challenge for this pairing, honestly.
How come?
Well, remember how we talked about the 2's tendency to overgive?
Yeah.
When things get stressful, that tendency can go into overdrive.
Oh, so they're trying to fix everything for everyone else.
Exactly, and they end up neglecting their own needs.
And then they burn out.
Exactly.
Okay. And how about the 4? How do they deal with stress?
The 4 tends to withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
They need time alone to process their emotions.
So they're kind of going in opposite directions again.
Yeah.
The 2's trying to fix everything externally, and the 4's imploding internally.
Yeah, pretty much.
So how do they bridge that gap?
Communication. Again, It's about understanding each other's coping mechanisms.
Right.
And being patient with each other.
So the 2 needs to understand that the 4 needs space.
Right.
And the 4 needs to maybe reassure the 2 that they're not trying to push them away.
Exactly.
Okay, so even in tough times, communication is still the key.
Absolutely.
Now, earlier we talked about how both 2's and 4's are drawn to deep conversations.
Yeah.
So what does that intellectual connection look like in practice?
Well, these 2 can talk for hours about all sorts of things.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Oh, art, philosophy, the meaning of life.
Deep stuff.
Yeah, they're not afraid to get into the big questions.
I love it.
The 2 brings their empathy and their understanding of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the 4 brings their unique perspective and their willingness to really delve into the mysteries of life.
So they're constantly learning from each other and expanding their worldview. Now, with all this talk about emotional depth and intellectual connection, I can't help but think about the romantic potential here.
Right.
So let's talk about that.
Okay.
What is it about this pairing that can make for such a passionate and fulfilling relationship?
Well, I think it comes down to their shared capacity for deep feeling. They can connect on a soul level, They understand each other's joys and sorrows in a way that many other couples just don't.
It's like they speak each other's emotional language.
Exactly.
But of course, no relationship is perfect.
Of course not.
So what are some of the challenges that might arise in a romantic relationship between a 2 and a 4?
Well, going back to what we talked about earlier, the 2 might start to overgive in the relationship.
Right.
They might lose themselves in trying to please their partner.
And that's not healthy for anyone.
No, not at all.
How about the 4? What do they need to watch out for?
The 4 might need to be more mindful of their tendency to withdraw. When they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, they might retreat into their own world.
And that can leave the 2 feeling abandoned.
Exactly.
So how do they avoid that?
Communication.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
It really does.
But if they can master that, it sounds like this pairing has the potential to be truly magical.
I think so.
All right, well, this has been a fascinating look at the dynamics between type 2s and type 4s.
Yeah, it has.
And I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more important aspect of their compatibility, and that's how they can support each other's growth and evolution within the relationship.
Okay, let's dive into that.
Okay, so let's talk about how a 2 and a 4 can really help each other grow in a relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because both of these types can be so supportive of each other's personal journeys.
Right, like how?
Well, the MLO 2, for example,
Yeah.
they're so good at creating that safe and loving environment.
Yeah.
They make the 4 feel accepted for who they are.
Yeah, unconditionally.
Exactly, and that can be huge for a 4 who sometimes struggles with feeling like they belong.
Right. And the 4, how do they contribute to the 2's growth?
Well, the 4, they can help the 2 to tap into their own emotional depths.
Okay.
The 2 can be so focused on taking care of everyone else.
Right. Always giving, giving, giving.
Exactly, and the 4 can remind them that it's okay to have needs of their own.
Yeah, and to express those needs.
Exactly.
So it's really a beautiful reciprocal relationship.
It is. It's about encouraging each other to be their most authentic selves.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to go back to that initial compatibility score of 8%.
Yeah.
Because I think we've seen that there's so much more to this pairing than meets the eye.
Oh, for sure.
Like, what are your final thoughts on the strengths and challenges of a 2 and a 4 being together?
Well, I think the strengths are pretty clear, right? We've got compassion, creativity, emotional depth.
Yeah, those are big ones.
They are, and I think those are the things that can really make this relationship sing.
But what about the challenges? Because we've talked about those too.
Of course, and I think the biggest one is boundaries.
Yeah, especially for the 2.
Exactly. The 2 needs to be really careful not to overgive.
Right, because that can lead to resentment.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's the communication piece.
Yeah.
Making sure they're on the same page emotionally.
Right, because they might express themselves in very different ways.
So it takes effort.
It does, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because when a 2 and a 4 get it right,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a truly beautiful and fulfilling relationship.
It's like they complete each other.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, this has been so fascinating.
It has.
And I think our listeners have a lot to think about.
I hope so.
If you're a 2 or a 4, I encourage you to really reflect on what we've discussed today.
Yeah.
And think about how you can apply these insights to your own relationships.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about understanding each other.
And growing together.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.